I felt like the series was like all loss for me and no gain, really, is kind of how I felt. I felt strongly negative about the series, I would say. It's the one thing I wouldn't do. Like, if I went back in my career, I would not have done Handmade Hero, because I felt like it exposed me to a lot of things that were pretty nasty. That would have been the complete answer to the question if it wasn't for BSC 2025. If somehow I'm really supposed to believe that all of these people would have made different choices in their life had they not done that series, and like Ryan really wouldn't have made the Rad Debugger and Vyacheslav wouldn't have made File Pilot or something like that, right? If that really is true, then probably Handmade Hero is the most important thing I'll ever do.
Welcome Casey Muratori for the second appearance on this show for a special episode on Handmade Hero.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, I would like you to take me back in time to the place where Handmade Hero started and kind of paint the picture of how the situation looked like, because now the streaming world and everything looks much more different than it was back then. So can we set the ground for Handmade Hero?
Sure. So I think it's 2014 would be the year, and the primary thing is that Jonathan Blow, who is a friend of mine, has been doing, he's been working on some compiler stuff. So this is before, JAI had been announced or any of that sort of stuff. And he decided, for reasons that I don't really know what they are, I've never asked him about it, but he decided that he was going to do, sort of streams of, him presenting the work he'd been doing on the compiler. And a lot of people, don't really remember this or don't know about this today, but a lot of features that you now are getting in a lot of other languages all come from the fact that John did them and demoed them, right? So things like the compile time execution and all that sort of stuff, he really kicked off a lot of that stuff because no one was being as aggressive with any of that as he was. And so, this was a pretty big deal. But point being, for some reason, he decided to stream that on Twitch, which was a very unusual thing to be doing at that time, because if you looked at what the content was typically on Twitch, there was basically no, software development content on Twitch that was really all that, I don't want to use the term professional, because that is just, are you getting paid to do it? What I kind of mean more is just the high-end tech content was not a thing that people were streaming on Twitch at that time. There were probably some streams of people tinkering with some game stuff or making something in Unity or that sort of thing. They weren't popular, right? There was very little the viewer numbers were not there. But Twitch otherwise was very popular. So if you looked at how many people were, tuning in to watch people stream games, that was still, it probably isn't similar to the, levels of interest that there are now, because it grows over time, obviously, but it was still quite high, in the tens of thousands. And, you turn into a software development quote unquote stream on Twitch at that time, and it's 8 people, right? So it's a pretty vast gulf. But John sort of kicks this off, and he was the first programmer that I recognize, know by name, has done important stuff in the industry, all that stuff, who is now streaming something important on Twitch, and that's a pretty big deal.
If you would like to support this channel, you can become a member on Patreon. You will be granted access to a private Discord channel where you can chat with other supporters and guests of this show. For more details, check out my website at wooka.sh. Wookash.
Now, people knew that I worked with John and was friends with John because I had written some blog posts called Witness Wednesdays that I did back when I was working on, I did part-time work for John on The Witness, doing some collision detection stuff and a bunch of stuff in the editor and things like this. And so they knew that I worked with John, and they knew that I was friends with John, and so people started asking me when I was going to do a Twitch stream. That's actually what happened. So if anyone wants to know why there's any Handmade Hero at all, it's because of John. Like a lot of things, John gets very little credit for having started a lot of things, in my opinion, right? Like a lot of things you can trace back to him kicking them off, and he does not get the credit he deserves for that. Sorry, everyone. That's my opinion on that. Anyway, so that's what happened, and I was just like, oh, well, I don't know, what should I do? Like, I'll have to think of something to do if I was going to stream, because I don't know. Like, John had this compiler thing that he wanted to stream. That's why he did it. No one was asking him for a stream. He just thought this would be a cool idea because he'd been working on it. I didn't have anything that I had wanted to stream on Twitch, or I would have. So I sort of thought, like, what would be an interesting thing to do? And so I was like, oh, maybe I could just do some game development where you record the process, because that way you could go... My idea for it was really just so that if you wrote something, like you wrote some part of a system, like, and we did a bunch of Handmade Hero. So, like, let's say the live recording stuff, like the live editing where you could, edit live and then, edit looped live and all that sort of stuff. Let's say you make some system, you could go back, and my actual thought was you could go back and see, okay, what mistakes did I make? And, like, how could I have optimized that process? It was more like the idea for it was more like, what if we had a way to figure out what you're actually spending time on and where you're actually making mistakes, instead of just, like, what you imagined was the case. You know what I mean?
So the Handmade Hero was like your idea to kind of track how you program and see what actually happens. Like, well, not
yes,
your idea, but like what actually happens.
Yes. And I don't know why I thought this, but I was like, oh, this would be a good academic exercise, meaning you could then, like, if you were, say, someone who studies productivity in a university setting or does research like that, you could go, oh, if people, and my assumption was, like, it wouldn't just be me, right? It'd be like, oh, well, other people might start doing this sort of thing. And then there'd be a lot of records of, like, people having programmed, and you could go look and see, oh, okay, that's, like, actually what's going on. Now, I don't know why I thought that, because at the time I already would have known or did know that, like, academic research into programming is awful. Like, it's very bad usually. So I don't know why I thought that would ever happen, or why I was thinking this would be a useful thing to do. I don't know why. But I just decided that I would do that, and it would be kind of a cool record, so you could go back and look at, like, okay, somebody had to write an entire system here from scratch. What did they do? And all that sort of thing. And so the reason I did the sort of actual Handmade Hero part was because I was like, well, all right. I mean, in my head, for some reason, I always think of, like, well, how do you roll this thing out? Like, how do you make this be something that is somewhat polished as a presentation? I tend to just do stuff that way. And I like to kind of figure out how it's, hey, what is the sort of way that this is a coherent thing that people can understand and like relate to, rather than just, I don't know, I just start up a stream and do something. So that's why I made, like, the trailer and gave it a name and had the ability for people to access the source code. And I originally didn't really want to have access to the source code, but my problem was I was thinking, like, oh, okay, if people want to kind of follow along at home, like, I wasn't really thinking much about it being that popular. I assumed very few people would watch the show. I was just like, well, if someone does want to follow along at home, it's probably easier if they can just get the source code to a particular day and then watch, have that specific source code in case they're, like, confused about something. I don't know. So I was just like, well, I don't really like giving source code away like this, but I guess I'll just do it so that, they can pay some money for it, and then they can just have that, and I don't know, like, whatever. I didn't have a solid plan for that at all. And there really weren't any services that tied all these things together. Like, there wasn't, and it still isn't, actually, to this day, a service where you can just do, like, oh, I'm going to do a course with, like, source code and videos and streams. Like, there still really aren't good services for this. So really, Handmade Hero was just a cobbled together bunch of things that were, like, the best thing I could think of to do at the time with, again, remember, I have a day job. So, like, it's what I do, what I can do in like after hours, right? Like, is all it was. So that's how it happened. And the success of it was a total surprise. I had no idea. Like, something like 800 people showed up for the first episode, which on Twitch numbers at that time was literally like 100x what I would have expected. And so I don't really have an explanation for that. I don't know why people were tuning in. I assume part of it was because maybe John's compiler streams had sort of garnered a little bit of attention and gotten some people thinking maybe Twitch was a place that these things could be watched. But I don't really have an explanation for that. So that's the situation in and I guess it's November of 2014 that I actually like pushed it out there. But that's it. And yeah, and I don't even think, and there wasn't like even a YouTube channel like I didn't have a following of people on YouTube or any of that sort of stuff. So so Handmade Hero was like the first video that was going up. Okay. So that's it. I don't know. That's just the situation. It's complete accident.
Okay. So you started with Intro to C so that people can follow along. And I'm assuming that...
No, actually, that is not what happened.
Okay.
I started with Intro to C because I needed to test the streaming setup. That was it. I was just like, look, I don't know if this works at all. And I have no idea what I'm doing, right? Because I've never streamed on Twitch before. Yeah. And people don't generally stream programming on Twitch at this point. So there's not a lot of, I don't even know. I had an old machine. So the actual machine that I was streaming from, I think, and this is really taxing my memory here, but I'm pretty sure it was something like an old Rad Game Tools machine that I had because I had been working on maybe Larrabee. And so it was for the Larrabee add-in card would go in there or something like this. I really don't remember. But it was something weird like that. And so it was just this old machine that was just in another room and that was not even my main machine. My main machine was a laptop at that time. And actually, that's not even true. So my main machine at home was a laptop. My main machine that I developed on was actually at work, which was an office, and that was a machine that I built. So it was literally like just, I don't even remember what the machine was, but it was just a machine that was not used for anything else and was old. And so that machine, I had to set up somehow to stream. I put a webcam on it, I guess, like, a Logitech, I think, one of those. I just looked up like what was the webcam to buy, put that on there, and then started doing the test streams. And I was like, well, I need something I don't want to stream the first episode of the show without knowing if any of this works. So I'll do a test stream. And so I was like, well, let me just do a little intro to C thing. Cause like, hey, this is what C is for those of you who don't know. And so I streamed like a couple episodes of that, and I was like, all right, seems to be working. So we started the show. That's what that was. There was no plan for that at all.
Okay. But I feel like you keep saying that like the idea of the show was not really educational, but it ended up being educational. It's like, oh, Intro to C was to test the stream. Ended up being an educational resource for everybody else to start C programming. So it's interesting.
Most of that stuff was accidental and, not very well conceived. I mean, one of the reasons that it's very surprising to me that so many people say that they learn so much from Handmade Hero is because it was not really laid out in a particularly intelligent way for that. And it's not concise at all. Like, I don't really know how that worked. So the educationalness of it was very accidental. And I think in retrospect, I more or less understand why that is, but I definitely didn't know why that was at the time, right? So it was very much not it was not a skill. Like, I was not doing this because I was smart enough to know that this would be a good educational resource. I literally just 100% stumbled into that.
Okay.
100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
How did you you ended up after work, like streaming, and you probably had to have some sort of a plan what you're going to do at any given point in time, and you needed to have some sort of direction where you're going. How did you think about those two? Like immediate goal
I
and
had
the long term?
neither of those two things. So I literally just sat down and did whatever I could see was the next thing to do, right?
Okay.
And I think honestly, like this is the main problem with the series as well for educational purposes. So I think there are some good things and some bad things about that, right? The good thing is that you get to see someone just have to figure out what they're doing on the fly, right? And that's pretty important. Probably 90% of the value of Handmade Hero is that, right? It's just like, oh, here's someone who's been programming for a long time, and here's how they would just like, if someone tells them to do X today, like here's how they're going to go figure out how to do X. And sometimes they know how to do X, in which case they just kind of say, well, here's how I do it and here's why. And sometimes they don't know how to do X and they spend a few days and they have to go like, oh, I don't know, let me try this, let me try that, right? And that's valuable because, you know, it's not really taught anywhere else. So that's like where a lot of that value comes in. The thing that's not very valuable in Handmade Hero is that there is no overall plan. There's no idea. Like even at the beginning of the show, I really have no idea what I'm going to do, right? I just kind of sit down and do it. And as a result, nothing in it is picked to naturally lead you through a series of things that are how the order you should lead them in, which you wouldn't really have to do very much to do that. It's just, you have to have thought of that ahead of time and been like, oh, okay, here's a project where the things that we would do in order naturally form like a increasing series of difficulty, so that you're not like going through this crazy swings of like, this is very difficult, this is very easy, right? So I think you could do a better version of it without losing the positive aspects of it, but you'd gain a lot more by having that, you know. And again, a lot of that is just, hey, having seen how it goes once when you just do whatever, then it's much easier hindsight wise to come back and go like, oh, okay, you do this way, you know, do this instead. So yeah.
Okay. So you started with doing the software renderer and pretty much putting any graphics on screen and then audio. This was the beginning of Handmade Hero. The interfacing with Windows API and then Xbox controller, putting the inputs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then more into the gamey stuff. How did you then pick, like, did you think before what you're gonna do, or this is like you sit down, you open this up, and then you have like an hour, or was it hour, or like it's like hour on time? Also, this is like interesting way to code with your timer nearby, and this is when you were deciding what you're gonna do in the beginning of the show.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess there's a couple of things there. So one thing is, like, this is... So the biggest thing you could fix about Handmade Hero, like I said, that organizational piece, is, like, what I should have done in retrospect is just pick an existing game to re-implement. Because then it would be very clear, like, what we were doing when and why. And also it could have completed on a very short time, because just be like, oh, it's just... You just have to implement these end things. There's no exploratory game design stuff, which I can't do, right? Which is, I'm not really qualified to do that. That's more of a John Blow thing. And so, you know, he'd be the person who would be able to stream that stuff and have it and have something good come out of it, right? Like have like a actual game that you wanted to play at the end of it, right? And so no, like I didn't have an idea, and also there's really no way for me to have gotten an idea if it was going to, because it's like I don't really have that kind of game design knowledge or skill. So for programming, it kind of worked okay, just because, you know, for programming things, I have enough experience where I can just kind of sit down and go like, oh, what are we doing? Oh, right, we haven't, you know, we haven't done a sampling the Xbox controller or whatever, or we haven't done like some way to track the entities, or we haven't done whatever. I can kind of figure out what that's going to be. But as that gets more into game design stuff, there's really not much I can really do there, because I'm just like, I don't know. Like, I have no idea what you would put here, and, you know, like John would, right? But I don't, right? So yeah, that's like my biggest, like, regret is that it would have been nice if there was just like, here's the game. like the game is just, whatever it is, it's burger time or something, right? And we go back to the old arcade thing. It's like, okay, the guy walks across the burgers and they fall down and whatever, right? And then you just know what you're making. That's probably what I should have done. But I mean, like most projects, when it's something that people, like, no one had done anything like this before, and when you're doing something that no one's done before, you really just have no idea. So you don't know ahead of time what are the parts that are important and what are the parts that aren't, what are good decisions and what are bad. So I don't blame myself too much for it, because it's like, you're just trying something wacky. The whole thing should have failed. It's surprising that any of it actually worked for anybody. And so, I'm okay with it at the end of the day. But would it have been nice if I had like John's skills or something so that I could do that part too? Yeah, because that would have been a really great resource for people as well. It would have been a great resource for me. Like, I would watch the show that is, you get to watch John design something small, because, like, if you think about how much work goes into something like a typical John Blow game, it's like thousands of hours of thought has gone into this thing, right? But, he could design something like, I'm going to make a version of asteroids that's really cool for today or something, right? And you watch him figure out like how that goes, and maybe that only takes 100 hours instead of, thousands of hours to do that, and you could watch the whole thing. That would be like an amazing thing, because there's so few people who have those kind of design skills, and it's pretty hard to, get that out of a distilled or after the fact. I'll mention someone else. So Tyler Glale, the person who is doing the programming for Mugenics right now, and possibly some of the design, I don't really know. Like, he and Edmund McMillan do it, and I imagine Tyler does design too on it. I don't know. I don't have any inside information into what their breakdown is. But like, Tyler definitely does all the programming, and Edmund definitely does all the art, and then where the design happens, I'm not sure. But point being, Tyler posted something recently that was a really, really important thing. And lots of people, know that in the game industry, a lot of people know this, but it's not said very often. It's very important. And that is that when you see people talk about game design, or people review games or things like that, what they're talking about is the end product that you received as a product that you bought and it's done, right? Or done in the case of early access, whatever you want to call it, right? Whatever you got, that was the end of some long series of things. And so when people talk about game design and they talk about a game that is done, that is not really, that has actually very little to do with game design, actually. Because game design is the process of starting with basically nothing or very little, maybe a couple baked mechanics. If if it's a first-person shooter, and so you're just like opening up Unreal Engine and the movement mechanics are done for you. There's maybe some things that you're just you're copying, right? You're sort of stealing that forward from a previous designer, or designers, plural. But the rest of your game, you are incrementally building it and making lots of little decisions about where to go. Just like in programming, right? And that is what you need to learn to be a game designer. It's not, how do I analyze this game at the end? Those skills may be sort of related skills that you do need to use to help you doing that decision, but it's not actually what you're doing. So the behavior that you need to train if you wanted to be a great game designer is, how do I do something meaningful every day that resolves some of this decision making and pushes the game in a correct direction towards being great, right? And so I think that's like not appreciated enough. It's very obvious when you say it, right? But it's not appreciated enough. And so those skills are not really taught very well in any particular place right now. And so that's kind of like what I mean when I say, in case people are confused about what I'm saying, that's what I mean when I say I'm not qualified to do that, but someone like John is, and so far no one that I know of who really has that sort of really amazing game design talent there are other people who have done this sort of things. Daniel Benmergui comes to mind, for example, a person who made Storyteller and Dragon Sweeper. There's people I know who are like really good game designers, I think. Not that I'm really the best judge, but there's more than just John, right? But the point is, none of those people have ever made an equivalent thing. And so it's very hard to learn those skills currently. And Handmade Hero doesn't have any of that in it because I don't know how to do it.
So this was more of always from the get-go, a programming stream, less so of a game development process.
Yes, although I tried to make it as develop-ish as I could. It's not clear how you do that, because if you look at how game development actually works, even you talk about the stuff putting game design aside. So let's just talk about engine development. So ignore all the game stuff in Handmade Hero and just talk about engine, the Windows code or the rendering layer, all that sort of stuff. There's really no way to get around the fact that the way I actually develop those things is I'm programming for many hours at a time, fairly uninterrupted. Like I will go get some food or something, but I'm not stopping every hour or even every 2 hours really, and then waiting 24 or more hours before I go again. And sometimes that doesn't matter, because if I'm just doing something that's very straightforward, then you can do it in 1 hour chunks or even get it done in an hour. Which you see on Handmade Hero several times. It's like this thing that seemingly sounds complicated, but I finish it in an hour or two. And the reason for that is because the line of like code you need to write to get from nothing to that thing is very direct. But a lot of times in game development, it's not direct, and you need a lot of experimentation and that sort of thing. So if you look at parts of Handmade Hero that take a really long time, like when I did like some lighting stuff that takes like 100 episodes or something, which is, 100 hours or 200 hours, something like that. That is both more representative of the process and less representative of the process at the same time, meaning you are going to spend 200 hours working on lighting, but it will probably come out better than that, A, and B, you would have been doing it slightly differently, because when you have that more concentrated work time and you're not talking, your whole brain is just focusing on doing it, you're going to go in different directions and get further and do better work. So in that part of Handmade Hero, or any part that's like that, I would say I don't know if there's an improvement. There is a thing you would have wished you could get, which is how do you show someone the process of actually building a real lighting system? And it's not that. And I don't know how you get closer to that. I don't, right? I mean, maybe you could just silently record yourself doing it and hope people and narrate it after the fact, but then they're going to have to watch 200 hours. Like, is that plausible? So I think there are limits to the Handmade Hero thing that's happening there that are just realistically, it may just not be possible to really get much out of that, because maybe the better thing is the person just goes, just go figure out how to do lighting yourself. You're going to take 200 hours to do it. And it's really like, I can't, other than you watching me for 200 hours, which is the same thing and less good as than you trying it probably, So I think there are some things where the model breaks down, and I don't think it's because Handmade Hero was like specifically bad at it. I think it's just because that format, it doesn't have much to add. In a lot of other places, I think it did, and it worked well. That's great. But in some places, it's not right. It's not helpful. That'd be my thought. But I'd love to be proven wrong, but, that's seems to be the case, and I can't think of what you would do to fix that.
Okay. In a couple of times, in especially the early episodes, you mentioned that, like, libraries are not evil, but we're not going to use any of them. And you're using, like, pretty bare bones Windows APIs to do everything. And
yes.
Was this like a conscious design choice for the entire series? Why was it the case that you stayed away from libraries?
I don't remember. I'll put it to you that way. So I can tell you some things that might be true.
Okay.
But I can't promise you that these were the actual reasons for that. So, thing number one is I don't use libraries. So, if I'm going to capture my development process, you're seeing it, right? I don't like, you know, if you look at the actual code base, you know, we did a game demo at DICE, for example, of our stuff, and there is not a single line of code running that I didn't write above the operating system layer. That's just how I program stuff, right? So if I'm going to load a Photoshop file, it's my Photoshop parser that I wrote, right? That's just how I do things. And so it makes sense for me to show doing it that way because that's more naturally what I would do. Now, it became very clear early on as well that, you know, people were watching this thing. Like I said, right off the bat, there was like 800 people or whatever. So I'm like, okay, I probably have to be somewhat careful what I say, because if I just tell people don't use libraries because I don't use them, that's not a very good piece of advice, because I know plenty of people who do use libraries whose code I respect. Like, I talked a bunch about John Blow very positively just, 10 minutes ago or whatever. I think he's one of the best game developers ever, right? He uses libraries. Like, he doesn't go write his own Photoshop parser or whatever. He would just use he would just go get an image library or whatever that he thought was okay, and he'd use that. Now, that's not to say that John probably wouldn't prefer to write his own Photoshop. Like, it's not to say that the ethos is all that different, because he probably gets pretty pissed off when that library screws things up, right? But he does because, unlike me, he is a designer, and he has to spend a lot of time doing those other sorts of things. I think he just makes the trade-off of like, well, I think I can save time by having this thing load PNGs for me or whatever it's going to do, and then I can be focusing on design work, and that's just a better trade-off, right? And so I wanted to make sure I respected the fact that other programmers do things differently, so I didn't want people to think that in order to be like a programmer who actually cares about stuff and like does a good job programming things, you also had to not use libraries, because that's not true, right? There are programmers who are great who don't use libraries, and there's programmers who are great who do use libraries, and which one you are it's really about building up the correct decision making so that you don't do the one thing you definitely don't want to do, which is use a library which becomes a liability, right? So you need to be able to make that decision intelligently. You need to be someone who knows that you don't use Boost, right? Or something like that, right? So you need to be somebody who knows the difference between a library that will save you time and one that won't, right? And so, but as long as you learn that skill, there's nothing inherently dangerous about libraries, because if you are good enough to be able to assess the library, then you should be good enough to avoid the one pitfall, which is picking a library that hurts more than it helps.
In the Handmade Hero series, do you program as you would program normally in your work, or do you deviate from that model for some reasons, because it's stream and you do something differently?
That's a really good question. So I guess what I would say is not intentionally. So I wasn't like trying to not program the way that I normally program. But what I would say is I definitely didn't program the way I normally program. So if you look at the code for Handmade Hero, it is kind of objectively worse than the code that I write for the code bases where I have all of my brain available during programming. Like, it's not free to talk while you program, for me anyway. And so you do lose something, and also the like chunkiness of it. you do lose something there. And to be fair, it may not be as much, the chunkiness may not be as big of a deal as the fact that there are other projects going on in the meantime that are occupying a large part of your brain too. So like maybe if I had done Handmade Hero as my full-time project, so that's just what I did. I just stream Handmade Hero and that's my job or whatever. Maybe then the code would have been closer, but I would say you do lose a fair bit of, you lose some percentage of programming proficiency doing it in the streaming format. And you gain some things, so it's not a straight loss. You lose some ability streaming programming, even if I think I'm probably better than most at talking while programming, because some people I know can barely do that at all. Like if they have to talk, they can't really program, right? So I can at least program some, like I don't get completely handicapped by having to talk at the same time, where I'm reducing that power down to some, really low level or something like that. But you do lose something. You gain something though too, which happened multiple times on Handmade Hero, which is that you do gain some pair programming. So, for example, there are times in Handmade Hero, and I can think of a few off the top of my head, but anyone who's seen the series can immediately think of some on their own too, which is something I don't know. Something I don't know about this particular Windows call, or something I don't know about this way the processor works, or whatever, right? Because the series was widely watched, much to my surprise, there were several people watching from time to time who were actually really good programmers. They weren't people who were had anything to learn from the series. They just watched it as entertainment or something to put on in the background, right? I was assuming the only people watching it would be, people whose skill level was significantly below mine, right? But actually there were people whose skill level was very high. And those people were just watching just for the heck of it. And they would write in, or in the chat. They'd pop in and be like, you can do thing X, right? So that's actually a thing where you gain. And you gain this extra ability that you don't have because some really great programmers, if they happen to tune in that day and they see you doing something that they know really well, they can have, it's the same as if you happen to work at a company on a code base and one of your team members is really great at that thing you're doing. They can help you do a better job. And so that was pretty cool because more than once in the series that happened. And that's something that boosts you back up. So you might say the general programming ability on Handmade Hero is below where I would normally be. The general programming knowledge on Handmade Hero is above where I would be because of that community help. Not because I was getting any smarter, but because they were contributing, right?
The use program for the an hour, an entire episode, and then you interacted mostly in Q&A, right? Or was it also during the episode?
Yes, I generally don't look at the chat during the episode, but in the Q&A, people would say, and it was like, oh, okay, and then the next episode we would know to do that or whatever, right?
Yeah. And a lot of people. You mentioned usually names people who are tuning in the chat and they're asking questions or telling something, suggesting something, and this was really surprising to hear Sean Barrett is there or somebody. It's
yep.
Okay, nice.
Martin's a lot of times Martin's Mosaico would often chime in and be like, hey, it's this, right? Because he's one of these people who just knows, he seems to know everything about every operating system call on every operating system that's ever existed, and it's just kind of nuts, right? And so, if there's some weird esoteric thing, because my knowledge of Windows programming is actually pretty high, on average, I would say, because I've done it for so long and I've worked with some programmers who were pretty into Microsoft. So I'd say I'm above average on Windows call knowledge, and Martin's is well above where I am. So he's above average, right? So, and that's just Windows, and he knows Linux that well, and he knows no Mac that well. I don't know what his office must look like, but I just imagine this thing where there's like every computer or something, right? And multiple languages too. So he's one of those people who just seems to know every esoteric thing. And so I feel like a number of times I really benefited from that too, because he'd be like, oh, you don't really have to use that Windows thing that way. It turns out you can actually do this other thing. And it's like, okay, did not know that, right? I remember there was one just absolutely wild one where he's like, oh, actually, IO completion ports, you can wait on that handle. And I'm like, no, you definitely can't, right? Because I had tested it. And he's like, weird, like, because I checked it and you can. It turned out that, like, between the two versions of Windows that we were on, the kernel team had added the ability to wait on IOCPs. And so, like, Martins literally had found that out, like within months of an undocumented. They didn't tell anyone that they'd done this, right? Okay. So, having someone like Martins watching the stream and chiming in from time to time about what's going on, that's just way more knowledge about any of this stuff than I would have. And so that's just kind of an example of, that collective knowledge being way, way more than I would have when I'm sitting down at my own desk to program, Everyone, if you could have a Martins next to you when you were programming, that's like invaluable. Like literally. So one of the like if I'm going to do something in the future where like it's a really heavy knowledge problem like that, I'm just going to stream it and cross my fingers that Martins tunes in, because it literally will go like 10 times faster. We had this happen when we were I literally did this when we were doing performance monitoring counters. I streamed it and Martins like solved the thing for me faster than I could even put the stuff together on the stream. That happened just 6 months ago. So yeah, it's like that's the kind of benefit that you get from having people watching who are highly skilled programmers. And I was very lucky that people did that, because that was a tremendous win for everybody, really, because then everyone got to benefit from that too. So they could see, people like Martins who don't stream their own stuff were basically sort of pseudo streaming through me by sharing all that knowledge with people, and that was great.
Since we're talking about Martins, maybe we can talk about like forum that happened after Handmade Hero launched a couple of weeks in, I think, or maybe months.
Yeah. People were asking for one, and I sort of tried to put one up. I didn't know, because I don't do web development, so I kind of was like, is there anything where you can kind of have like an episode and then people could like talk about the episode underneath it? And the answer was like, no. Like, nope. That doesn't exist. The answer is always no. Like with web development, the answer is always no, as far as I've told. Like anytime I'm like, can we do X? And they're like, no. Right. And so that's always great. But anyway, so I put up something with some kind of weird like Joomla thing, or I don't even remember what it was. Some weird thing you could just go pay for, like hosting it on some site. And I don't really remember how much that got used, or if, or what was happening with it. But I guess people used it a little bit. And then, oh man, this is getting like really taxing my brain. So then at some point, the folks who did the Handmade Network thing, they made a custom forum thing. They did their own thing, and I had nothing to do with it. And it was a dude who's not around anymore. Like, and I'm completely blanking on his name, who like wrote most of it. Do you happen to remember?
No.
It's like this is a sign like I'm getting so old now. Like I used to remember everybody who did everything, right?
Okay.
And it's weird because it's like your brain gets worse at constructing the knowledge. It doesn't lose the old knowledge that much. So like I can still like the other day I was doing some photography for a website update that we're doing. and they were talking about how they had a thinking machine, and I was like, my brain's immediately like, oh, thinking machines. Like, I remember reading the paper by Carl Sims, who like wrote this thing about evolving virtual creatures, right? And I remember all this stuff. Nowadays, I read a paper and like I completely forget who the author was or what was in the paper. Like, it's just gone, right? And so getting old really does suck. And so I just don't remember a lot of the stuff that I would have if I'd started the series when I was 25, right? So anyway, point being, at some point, and they took over the forum side of things at some point, and they made one because I don't really want to do any of that stuff. It's not my thing. I didn't want to deal with web stuff. I still don't like dealing with web stuff. I kind of begrudgingly do it. And so how much value people got out of that, I don't know. I never really paid that much attention to those things. And so, that's really something that other people would have to talk about, like whether the forums were valuable to them or if they, were able to use them effectively. But that wasn't really my thing. Martin's, however, even just in the small amount that I use the forums, like, again, just any question anyone has, he's just like, oh yeah, back when I did that thing, it's this, right? I've heard from Martin's. This is the best thing ever. I've heard from Martin's that at one point he forgot a thing. He didn't know he'd forgotten it. He just forgot it. And so he searched on the internet for the answer to like an API question or something like that. Like, how does the blah, blah, blah do something or whatever? He gets to a Stack Overflow question where someone has asked this question and the answer is in there in the Stack Overflow and Martin's wrote it.
Nice.
So, like, the past version of him was still... So, even when Martins doesn't know the answer to a question, it's Martins who answers the question. It's just a past version of Martins before he forgot the thing. Yeah. That is whatever the question was about, right? So, so he shows up everywhere and answers questions. He's amazing. I always praise him anytime I'm on these things. It's not me just being effusive. It's really kind of nuts. He's one of the most prolific... I don't know what you want to call it, tutor might be the best word for tutors of sort of these esoteric programming things that people need to know. Like, you always are confronting these things when you're writing programs because there's so much surface area, especially nowadays, and it's so underdocumented a lot of times how some of these things work. He's one of the most prolific tutors who shows up and explains to people how these things actually work. It's really amazing, and I can't say enough positive things about Martins. It's really pretty great. But anyway.
How did the show evolve over time then? Because like at some point probably you heard, like you felt there was a bit more excitement in the beginning, right? I guess it kind of became a side job, unpaid job in the evening. And then like you kind of needed to come up with a thing to do. Like, was it fun? Was it a drag at some point? Like, it was 700 episodes, like 696 to be precise, if with intro to C. So it was a long time.
Yeah. So I guess what I would say is the programming was always fine, and I never really found it to be a drag. But I'll say two things. The things that were drags are... One, I found it does actually negatively affect my ability to do other programming. So having to have another complete project in your head like that was not a good idea. It's kind of like if you're playing chess and like, if you have to play 2 games of chess at once, it's a lot harder than playing 1 game of chess. Right. And so like when one of those grandmasters or whatever wants to show off and they play chess against 20 people or whatever, if some other grandmaster showed up, they would just get annihilated, right? like it's not, you can't play grandmaster level chess if you also have to play 20 other games. Now, maybe you sort of can if the other 19 people are just that dumb, but really what I mean is, like, if you're trying to do 2 projects and you're actually doing serious program both, that's like playing 2 grandmasters at the same time, right? And, there's probably someone out there who could do it. My brain isn't really cut out. It can't do it. Like, that's a bridge too far. And so if you're trying to do like serious work like that, it's just not, it's not going to do it. Like I'm not going to be the grandmaster who goes around playing 20 games at once. Even that is probably not in the cards. So that was actually the biggest problem, because doing other programming work at the same time, it just takes a lot of focus, especially because I'm always trying to do interesting things with programming. I'm rarely, I don't know, at some point here I should probably just go get a job at like, you know, some AI company where I just sit in an office and type in 5 lines of Python and call it a day. But you know, I like doing, you know, like I like doing kind of like weird experimental stuff where I'm like trying to do new architecture things, or I'm trying to figure out new ways of doing things. And when you're doing that kind of programming, it does require a lot of concentration, and you can't really do it twice. So that's why I say also in retrospect, it would have been a lot nicer if Handmade Hero had just been, you know, something where we just did asteroids or something, right? Something where you're just talking about like, okay, it's fairly low scope. And so, you know, people probably would have still gotten most of the things they needed to get out of it that way, because we still, you know, just don't use any libraries, do everything from the ground up, explain what you're doing. I still think you would have gotten most of the things you needed to get. And you could do asteroids with texture mapped asteroids. Like, you don't have to do just line art or whatever. So you can still get as much complexity as you needed in there, right? But so that was a drag. That part really was, and I didn't like that. The second thing that I don't like is I actually don't really like I don't like public programming discourse. I think it's awful. I don't have a lot of patience for it. I guess I've gotten more patience over time as I've just had to do it because it's sort of part of the job. But overall, this kind of gets into probably a completely different subject area, but overall I would say that I just don't find, I find it is mostly a waste of time, right? And so that was very unsatisfying. And it's especially unsatisfying because most of the people who are going to comment on something like Handmade Hero really just don't have any idea even what you're doing. They're just commenting, but they don't have very much knowledge of any of that stuff, right? And they're not really taking the time to look at what you're doing in any serious way. And so most of the time you're just having a completely vapid discussion, and it's very it's really annoying, I guess is what I would say. So that part of it was really the worst part, right? Is because anytime there's something popular, which Handmade Hero ended up being, everybody wants to like criticize it or say that it's wrong or whatever else. And most of those people, some of those people are correct, meaning they have a criticism that's actually, useful in some way. And most of the people aren't. Like, most of the people are saying things that are just like objectively false or something like they just aren't even in the ballpark of something that would be useful. And dealing with that is not fun. It just isn't. Unless you're somebody who either A, doesn't care, and there's some people who are like that. So they literally just don't care. They are just like, I couldn't care less, and so I just ignore people when they talk about stuff. Or B, someone who enjoys the fracas, right? Like somebody who actually, right? There are people, and I don't want to name any names there because I may name someone who actually doesn't enjoy it and just seems like they're good, like is really doing a lot of work to do that, right? Like I'm thinking maybe, I don't know how you pronounce it, Tsoding, Tsoding, right? Like people who are really good at trolling and are like seem to be doing things just to get back at those people who are like, and are and I love that, by the way. Like I watch his posts and I'm loving every minute of it. But I don't know. He may be super unhappy for all I know. He may just be doing an amazing job faking it. But if you're somebody who can take a better angle, like I think I'm just too close to it. Like I care too much about whether people know these things, and get them right. And I care too much about wanting programming to move forward to do that. I've tried to learn to be better about that and just be like, what are you going to do? Or to go the other route and just, or just troll or just be amusing. Or the Primogen's another example. He takes a different tack where he just kind of takes it very lighthearted, right? It's very humorous, and less trolly. But either way, like that's just not my nature. So it's pretty hard for me to take that kind of thing, like, And so that's absolutely miserable. Like that's the part that really made it sort of not happy to do. Was mostly that kind of thing.
Did the programming discourse over time changed? Like you were programming for a long time and you've seen the programming internet culture for a larger chunk of time. Did it change over time, or was it always this kind of negative? And whenever something's popular, there's so many people that say, "Oh, actually, no, actually."
I think it was always that way. Like, okay. I don't think it's even like internet as we know it, like World Wide Web. You can probably go back before that. You can probably go back to things like shared notes systems, like Usenet kind of things or stuff like that. And you can probably find this exact same thing. So that's just how it is, right? And I think to a certain extent, you kind of have to... You kind of just have to accept that is not going to change. Ever, right? The whole world could come around to programming my way tomorrow, and that still wouldn't change. The fact that it is going to be having discussions in this manner, right? So it's not even, it is modulo worse when you're trying to convince people to stop doing some things that they've been doing for a long time. But I would say, actually, as weird as it is, I think we've kind of succeeded at that to a certain extent. The percentage of programmers nowadays who like care about not having, 800,000 assembly language instructions get run just to add two numbers together is actually much higher today than it was, I think, when Handmade Hero started. And that's thanks to a lot of people kind of pushing that offensive, right? Going like, hey, software is really, really bad right now, and we need to do something about it. And I feel like that has been working, actually. So I would say that the net change has been positive in terms of how people program. But the net change in terms of the chances that people who are commenting on something are actually adding something to discussion, it's never going to change. Like, that's not a thing we can really improve. So I think you just have to kind of be okay with it how it is. And you also have to be cognizant of the fact that, like, so if I imagined how many times I have commented on something and been wrong about it, right? So everyone in their head imagine when they've done that. Let's say it's just once. So your entire life, you've only made one incorrect comment on a thread. Your whole life, that's all that happened. Well, still, like with 20 million programmers or however many there were, that's 20 million annoying, blatantly wrong comments that were made. So that's what's happening, right? So you can't really get away, I think, at the end of the day, it's a numbers game, from even if people are wrong very infrequently. If you're someone who's bothered by incorrect stuff, and you can add to that, just ignore incorrect even, like incendiarily phrased, right? Think of how many times you haven't phrased something as politely as you could have, right? Same thing, right? So even if it's only once in your life, that's 20 million incendiary comments that we have, right, from the programmers in the world today. So I do think it's a numbers game. There's no real getting away from that. Even if people are on their best behavior 90% of the time, that means 10% of the time they're not. and that's just a lot of stuff to wade through. And the human psychology being what it is, you will notice those. Even if you have 9 comments of people being very constructive and being polite about something, then you get to one where somebody's an asshat. Well, you're going to remember the asshat pretty well, actually, right? So again, I think it's all just not in favor of that. So that's just a negative part of it, and I don't think it's going to improve. I think that's just how it is, and it's just human nature. It's nobody's fault, I don't think. I honestly don't.
Okay. Back to Handmade Hero then, from the tangent.
Okay.
How did the series affect you personally? Like you have your day job, you're programming, you started doing the series. It's growing in popularity pretty much from the start. How did it affect you?
Other than the things we've talked about, I don't know that it did affect me much. So I guess I have to split that into 2 parts, which may be getting a little bit ahead of where you want to be in the interview right now. But so mostly I would say for like the first, let's say, so it's been about 10 years. So I'd say for like almost 10 years, I would say that the cumulative effect of Handmade Hero was largely negative, right? So I felt like I had spent a lot of time on this thing. I didn't really like a lot of what I felt like had happened with it. And just in general, like I said, like having to be on the internet and arguing about things I didn't like. And it kind of wedged me into a position where I felt like I had to do a lot of things I just didn't want to do, right? And so I felt like there was not much... Like, I felt like this series was, like, all loss for me and no gain, really, is kind of how I felt. Like, I felt strongly negative about the series, I would say. That is roughly what I would say about it. And I was like... In fact, I have said at one point publicly, I think... But I definitely felt this way if I haven't said it publicly. I definitely felt I was like, it's the one thing I wouldn't do. Like, if I went back in my career, I would not have done Handmade Hero. Because I was like, I felt like it exposed me to a lot of things that were pretty nasty. And we don't have to go into all of those. But I felt like there are a lot of things that happened that I really didn't like. And I was very upset about those things. And I was like, I wish none of that had happened. Because personally, I didn't really get anything from the series, right? I just did all these episodes and that's it, right? So I would say, like, mostly negative, and I was not feeling good about it. That would have been the complete answer to the question if it wasn't for BSC 2025. So that was a complete, like, I don't know what you want to call it, like a complete, like, mental 180 for me in terms of my thinking about the series. So, for people who watch this show probably know what BSC is, but for anyone who is watching who doesn't know, it's a thing called a Better Software Conference. First one is in 2025. I think they're going to do another one next year. But the 2025 was the very first year. And effectively, it was some folks who decided they just wanted to do a conference for people who think software needs to get better. I mean, that's kind of how you would say it, I guess. And I don't want to put words in their mouth because, you know, I had nothing to do with organizing it or anything. And it's held out in Sweden, out kind of in the middle of nowhere. You have to take a train to get there for 4 hours or something like this. It's crazy. Yeah. It's the most ridiculous place you could ever hold a conference. That's where it was. And I wasn't originally even aware of any of this stuff, but a friend of mine, well, I guess, actually, have you had Wasim on this show yet?
In next week.
Next week, okay. Okay, so the guest from next week, Wasim is a friend of mine who I met actually through Handmade Hero, because I guess he had watched it, or some of it. And he messaged me and said, like, do you want to maybe come to this thing? they're doing this conference, or you could present like remotely. And I was like, wait, what is it? And it's like, oh, well, we're going to do this conference. It's going to be our structure. It's like, here's the page people got. And I went on there and I looked, and like the speaker list was kind of nuts. It's like, it was, you know, it's going to be Ryan and Vyacheslav and, you know, a bunch of people who Dmitry, who I knew. And I was like, oh man, okay. Like this is going to be kind of nuts. I'm like, yeah, I mean, I'll support this conference. Like, I don't really know much about it, but it looks like, you know, it looks like this is something that's really kind of crazy. And not doing the sort of normal things that conferences do, right? It's actually targeting people who are pretty specifically focused on making good software and not really monkeying around with the rest of the sort of conference stuff. So I said yes to it, and for some reason went out to the middle of nowhere in Sweden for this conference. And it was really a complete... It was just a complete 180 for me mentally, because at the conference, first of all, people were incredibly nice to me. Like, everyone had so many positive things to say about Handmade Hero, and many of the people at the conference were like, I got started doing this kind of programming because I watched that show. Now, that is something that I have heard before, because people send a lot of emails, right? Like, I get emails from people who are like, I thank you so much for the series and that sort of thing. And that's... all I can say is, if you've never had this happen, getting emails like that, it doesn't have that much emotional effect. It just doesn't. Email, like, in the same way that it's easy to be a dick online because you're just typing characters, where you probably wouldn't have been if you were talking to that person face to face, right? In that same way, it doesn't have a whole lot of emotional effect to receive an email for whatever reason. I can tell you from experience, it doesn't really. Being somewhere with people who you know have done amazing software things. Like I mentioned, Vyacheslav, FilePilot is like this amazing file browser replacement for Windows that I now use. Like, I am a paying customer of this product, and it is what I use to browse files. In fact, I'm kind of mad that it's not just the built-in file browser, because sometimes, right, like, things, you can't hook all of the Windows things, so some other the old Explorer window will pop up because somebody called like some kind of shell thing that pops that up instead. And I'm just like pissed because I can't do like all the fast like search or whatever I want to do in FilePilot, right? So we're talking about, a conference that's filled with people who have tremendous amount of respect for, and they are saying that like they started doing this because of that show. And that just had a really, really tremendous emotional impact on me, where it took something that I was really unhappy about and thought was a waste of my time and really wished I hadn't done, and turned into something that I almost felt bad I didn't do better, right? like it completely flipped my entire mental model of this thing. And some of the folks there even gave me this little, I can't show it to you yet because it's still being shipped from Sweden to here, but gave me
really?
this little, I don't know how to describe it. It's like, it's almost like a little monument to Handmade Hero. It's got the screen with the letters typed on it, and it's in glass, and it's on this like wooden base that looks like an Amiga computer. It's amazing. And like, I've never had anyone do anything like that for me before, and certainly not for anything related to programming, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, that was just absolutely amazing. Like, it was just the nicest things people had ever done. And it was just an amazing, it was so crazy how many programmers who I thought were so good were somehow saying that this was an important series. And it really just like, I was like, that emotionally made me feel like it really was. And so how it's affected me now is a very complicated question, because I'm like, it really depends on when you're asking me. Nowadays, I'm like, I would never say that Handmade Hero was a waste of time. If somehow I'm really supposed to believe that all of these people would have made different choices in their life had they not done that series, and like, Ryan really wouldn't have made the RAD debugger, and Vyacheslav wouldn't have made FilePilot or something like that, right? If that really is true, then probably Handmade Hero is the most important thing I'll ever do, right? Because those things are things I use today, and those are some of the best programmers in the world. And I having any contribution at all to having them decide they wanted to make better software instead of whatever else it was they might have done is way more payback than any blood, sweat, and tears I put into the series, right? So at that point, it becomes an instant win. How long would it take me to go make a complete debugger? How long would it take me to make a complete file browser and maintain it, right? Would I even finish those things? They're huge undertakings, and these guys did it, right? So when you look at stuff like that, it's just like so I just have to say, I'm like, okay, like, you win. This was a very valuable series. I 100% agree. I wish I'd done a better job at it. I'm very, very thankful that somehow it had the effect that it did, and I'm absolutely in awe of what some of the people who claim that the series was important to them have gone on to do, because they are really, really amazing programmers, and they're just getting started, some of them, right? So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was surprised that you maybe to this extent didn't know about the influence of the series. When you say that you were feeling bummed out, like there is large community, probably like 100 times more people that could show up in Sweden in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
There's
not enough room for them at that hotel. That's so tiny.
Exactly.
There was barely room for us, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like Billy Basso making Animal Well, he told me the story about like coming back and like watching your stream as if like, oh, what's another new episode of Handmade Hero, like as if like every day new stuff.
I had no idea.
Stuff. And you know, like Animal Well wouldn't happen without that, definitely. So
I had no idea about that. I really didn't. And yeah. Oh, well, let me add one more thing to that though. So another one was he wasn't there, but Bill Hall, who made Odin, right? He also said that in his presentation, which he did remotely because he had his appendix removed, and he still gave a presentation to the Better Software Conference. That's how dedicated these guys are, right? Went out of his way to include that in his presentation. And that's a whole language that he's claiming he was motivated to do by this. And again, I'll take them at their word. I don't know if they're just being nice, but again, part of it is, I think, when you see people take this much time and go through this much effort to thank you for something, it seems like they must really mean it. It's hard for me to believe, but I think that was part of why BSC was such a emotional experience, because it was kind of like, it seemed undeniable. It was like, these people really mean it. Like, they really do mean it. They're not just sending off an email. Like, they really did care about this series. And the things that have come out of that are so much bigger than the series ever could have been by itself in any way, right? So whatever that motivational piece was, I'm extremely it's very emotional, and I'm literally like, I can't believe that it really had that big of an effect, but thank God, because I love that all of this stuff is getting built, because it's so much better than the things that we had, right? And I never could have done any of those things myself. So making a series that inspired other people to do it was in some ways the only way I could have played a role in those things, because I wasn't going to do any of those things, right? And these guys did it. So
a couple of years ago, you started the performance-aware programming series on Substack, accessible under computerenhance.com. Shout out. Super cool. I love it. Now, this was a differently imagined series of videos, right? You have, in a way, it's similar to Handmade Hero. You still you prepare a video of you walking through some technical stuff, aiming at some level of educational. We established that Handmade Hero was actually never meant to be educational, but ended up being.
Yes.
Performance-aware programming is also educational series. There's a Q&A, but it's also more Substack. You need to be a subscriber. There's a definitely different model, both the financial, but also like of episodes coming out, we don't see you cold. We see you with your fancy light board, which is and everybody's psyched about like flipping
Yes,
XY.
right.
Exactly. So how would you compare the two series in terms of the structure? What do you think works better? For what reason? Like, how do you, if you were to contrast the two of them, how do they come out?
So the Substack one was more to see whether there was a commercial model for doing educational content. Because essentially, like, it takes a lot of time to make something educational and it was unclear whether there was a way to pay for it, is I guess the best way to say it. Handmade Hero doesn't really have a revenue model. The fact that you could order, like, that you could do like a source code thing was kind of just an afterthought, and it's not really, there's not really a lot of point to it. I mean, I guess you could imagine doing something more structured where maybe it cost more money and you got the videos and the source code with it or something. You could imagine trying to do a version of Handmade Hero that didn't have much modification to it, but that did have some way that it was going to pay for itself. I guess I should add some things to that, because a lot of people probably don't know much about the economics of this. So let me try to break it down for people. So when you're talking about something like this kind of programming, so if I was going to go do a course called like, advanced Python for AI machine learning, right? Then you can pretty much just poop out whatever you want, because whatever you sell it for, there's like 100,000 people who are going to take that course, because it's like what they think they have to take to go get a job at, Meta or whatever it is, right? So if you're going to teach something that's like in the zeitgeist, you have a lot of flexibility there. And really all you have to do is figure out how you're going to catch people's attention so that they want to come take your course. But I'll be honest, the competition is not particularly fierce there, right? Like the social media presence of most educators is not particularly amazing or anything like that. So it's not like you're going up against the hardest nut to crack there or anything like that. But if you're going to do something like, hey, you should care about software because caring about software is part of like having pride in your work and making something that's good for society and that doesn't waste resources and that provides a pleasant experience to your users. Nobody cares about that, right? People will go out of their way to tell you online that they just want to finish their job as quickly as possible and they don't care what the customer, like, there's entire books that start with that premise. They start with the premise that the idea is to save you time and ship crappier software to your end users. Okay, like, I wish this were not the case. I wish it was a secret. Like, I wish people were embarrassed about that. Nope. Literally, people lead with that. They're like, look, the goal here is to do the least amount of work possible. And who cares? As long as the customer buys it, we're good, right? And that's the attitude. Now, I understand it's a very pragmatic attitude, so I suppose that's fine. But at the end of the day, that's the attitude of some very high percentage of people, I guess, because that skates. Like, those people don't get shouted down. If they were to get up at a normal conference and start saying that, you would not get laughed out of the room. People would just watch the lecture because that's normal, right? So that's kind of the industry that you're going into. And so you have to be aware that, like, the things that I would want to teach, meaning, things that I care about doing, the number of people who might be willing to pay for that is very small by comparison. You're starting with a worldwide estimate of something like the 20 million I said before. So there's only 20 million people total who are an addressable market in any way, even if you made the programming course that everyone in the world watched. So when you compare that to a billion people who might play, could be video game players, the orders of magnitude that you're thinking of when you think of markets, or the multiple billion of people who you might use a website, right? The total addressable market, if you somehow got 100%, is so tiny by comparison. And then when, like you said, you factor in the fact that a huge percentage of the people, probably 90% of the people, just are doing it as a job. They're just going to work to do whatever it is that they were asked to do because they're doing it as a job. And there's nothing wrong with that because most people who have a job are doing it as a job. That's why they pay you. It's because it's something you didn't want to do, right? It's like I go to work and I make the fries at the McDonald's or whatever it is. I'm not doing that because I'm super passionate about fries. I'm doing that because that is how I get paid and I need the money. Right. And so that's a huge percentage of people in any industry, not just programming, but in any industry, they're just doing it. And so those people are out, right? They aren't going to want to hear about the kinds of stuff that I'm talking about. So that part, you're down, you're talking to maybe 1 million people once you start paring this down, right? You're talking about maybe 1 million people who even are in the ballpark of who you could be addressing, right? So when you're talking about a market that small and you start to think about like what are plausible conversion rates on something, right? A plausible conversion rate is 1% or something like that. Maybe. That's a plausible on most things. That's a plausible, thing. So you're talking down in the 10,000s, 100,000 at the very, very highest, right? For the kinds of stuff I do. So it really is an open question. Are there funding models that make this possible to do? Modulo trying to relocate, right? Like being in the Pacific Northwest is not great. That's just where I happen to be. And I could relocate, but the cost of living here is astronomical compared to most places. It also is kind of this annoying thing where it's like living in an area where people are mostly employed in jobs that are doing the kinds of like large money siphoning that, and your Azures and your AWSs and things like that are doing, right? You have to come up with a business model that's going to allow you to make a reasonable living in that area. And that's pretty tough too, right? So the economics of all this stuff is not great. And it's an open question as to how you fund it. So Computer Enhanced was just an experiment to see like, well, if I did something that's sort of vaguely applicable somewhat wide, right? Because it's like, okay, performance is something that everyone does kind of encounter from time to time, even if you just don't even care what the performance is of something you're shipping. At some point, you're hit with some kind of user study that shows that the 2 seconds it takes to open your application is actually hurting adoption, and people panic, right? And you get these mandates from your boss to like speed it up or whatever. And you haven't been taught anything about this, right? Because it's not taught well. You don't really know much about where you would look for these sorts of things. All the advice on the internet is usually garbage, right? It doesn't teach how to reason about performance from first principles at all, so you're usually just left hanging. You end up with this weird voodoo advice like, don't call memcopy, always call memcopy, or whatever. You find like complete, and it's like, that's not how we deal with performance, people, right? Like, that's not how this works. And so it was just a test to see like what would happen if we did something that tried to like, okay, could education be a full-time job? I don't know. Probably not, but let's see. Turned out the answer was yes, which is somewhat surprising. Because really the only thing that makes that work is that people are willing to pay like a subscription fee though. Because there's 2 real alternatives. One is they subscribe for a few months and watch the content. And the other is they have to pay like, $80 or $100 or something like that one time, which is usually harder for people. Like the chance that you can pay $9, $15 a month, something like that, more like a Netflix subscription, or you just happen to have $100 sitting around or something like that. There's a difference in accessibility there. There's a reason kind of like somewhat exploitative services like Klarna exist, because they allow you to buy something in installments, right? And so, they kind of make money as a middleman off of that, which is not great. It would be much better if the original supplier just had a way for you to buy the thing on installments, because then there's no money loss there, right? But either way, that, that's making something more accessible to somebody because they can factor it in as a monthly cost that's low rather than a one-time cost they have to save up for or things like that. So you can do it. It does seem like right now it's pretty reasonable. I don't know. But as an experiment, it definitely succeeded. The question is just like, okay, what do we do with that information now? Right? Like, and I don't really know. And I guess there is some, just like thinking about it, you're like, okay, so if you do have that support from people who are paying, if that was something that, if that persists, it's been going for about 2 years now, and it seems to persist. People come and go, right? They subscribe for a little while, they watch content, they leave. And that's fine because you only need a certain number of people at any time subscribing to, make it be a reasonable income level. And so, it seems plausible. I haven't really worked out what the best way to take advantage of that is or how that should go, but the educational resources that you build up, if you can find a way for them to be sort of relevant long-term, you also can eventually, when I retire, they can be released. Like those things are built and exist and will exist, right? So you're kind of funding, it's almost like a Kickstarter funding for educational materials, right, in a way, where some people are funding it, and in a way everyone could have it eventually, right? If once the person is, once I get run over by a bus or whatever my demise is, right, those things can just exist and, they could be released for free or something. So it seems like it has some promise. I'm just not sure. And again, one of the problems is in this area, the economics are very poorly studied because you're talking about something that is incredibly niche that tends to have a very high value for a very small number of people. And the way you normally deal with those things economically is they're fantastically expensive. Right? It's like this course costs $10,000. Like it's like a university, right? It's exactly. Like it's $50,000, right? And that doesn't really seem very good because again, if you just look at the end goal of trying to encourage people to adopt better ways of programming, if you make it be like Harvard University, then all of a sudden there's only 3,000 people in the world who can access that thing, right? And that becomes an issue. And those people, and there's a worse aspect of that, actually. Same as Harvard. Those people who will access it are not probably the people who would have gone on to do the most important stuff with it, right? So you're also not targeting with the you're basically just targeting the money at that point, right? You are succeeding at funding this thing with that kind of model, but you are totally failing to actually address the people, some of whom may be poor, some of whom may not be able to, some of whom may not even be able to pay you. Right now, if you live in Russia, you literally can't pay for something in the U.S., right? So what does that even mean, and how do we deal with those kind of things, right? It's not their fault. Like, some programmer, some kid who was born there, he doesn't have any geopolitical control, right? He can't decide to make that situation go away so he can learn how to program, right? So there's a lot of factors that go into that sort of thing that make it so that, here's your one-time $10,000 course is not a great aspect. Like, there's that model is for, like research newsletters use this kind of model, right? And things like that, where it's like, oh yeah, like the monthly subscription cost is $2,000. That's a real price of like of a research newsletter. So that's kind of the backdrop for that sort of stuff. And so Computer Enhance is in a pretty good place right now, I would say, where the price is not too high. So I think people can afford to subscribe for a few months if they'd like to access the content. But it's also generating enough revenue that it's reasonable for Pacific Northwest. And I probably, like, I think it pays better than the equivalent job I would go get if I went to Microsoft and said, give me a job, right? So it is actually succeeding at what it was experimented to do. So that's pretty cool, I think.
That's awesome.
If that makes sense, yeah.
That's awesome. Do you think if you were to go back in time and you knew the Handmade Hero popularity, would you think it would make sense to make it also in the same format with like a monthly subscription where only the people who really want to get into this stuff will get this stuff, like not?
No, I wouldn't do that. And so I think the reason for that is that the two things I would do if I were going to do Handmade Hero over again is like I said, I would pick something very simple with a spec. So just be like, we are re-implementing X, where X is just a known game that we pick, right? So that way we know exactly what needs to be done. And there's no game design, right? The game design is just literally like we will clone it.
Get rid of the game design.
Yeah, the game design's gone. So it's just like we will just clone it. So making a better game out of this is an exercise for the reader, right? Is how I would say that, right? So it's like, if it's asteroids or whatever, you're just getting asteroids. And then you got to figure out how to make a better game than asteroids, right? So I would do that, and then I would probably just make it completely free, because it would be a shorter time span. It'd probably only be like 300 episodes for something like that, because we had everything we would need for asteroids, right? Like, I don't know, day 100 probably. Honestly, it was pretty early in the series that you could have just like, here's asteroids, we're done, right? So I'd probably just make it free, and I just do it that way, because it's like, it's pretty bounded. It's 100 hours of work. That's not very much. Have a party. And because it's entirely hindsight, I know that I get a file browser, a debugger, new languages. Like, I get all these things out of it. It's like, that's good enough for me, because the time commitment is very low, actually, at that point, right? So that's probably what I would do. Very specific scope game with a game design I can clone to fix that problem. And then I just probably just make it free.
So this was talk about what would you do different if you were to start Handmade Hero over with the knowledge that you have now. But recently, couple of times you mentioned that you kind of considering doing the Handmade Hero 2, like 2.0, or like a sequel,
yeah.
or like a course. So what's your state of mind on that?
So my state of mind on that is, so my pipeline is very full of stuff that I have to do right now, right? There's just a lot of things that need shipping that we have, and so we kind of have to finish those things, and that's just what I'm working on at the moment. So there's nothing I can really do in the short term, but like I said, pre-BSC 2025, I was like, I'm not touching anything like that ever again. Like, forget it, right? But post-BSC 2025, I'm definitely thinking like, okay, so probably if at some point I can get to a point where I'm just like pseudo-retiring, like I'm just like, I'm not really going to do any more, like I'm not at a point where I need to be doing stuff during the day for any particular purpose. I would probably go do a second one now. I at least would try it. I don't think I would do a streaming version, meaning I would record myself programming, but I'd probably do it just my own self and have a little bit more, like, it would be a little bit more of a fusion between the two things. So it would still be Handmade Hero style, but it would also involve a little bit more sort of curation of the path that was taken. And if I record an episode and I don't feel like, the explanations were good in it, I would maybe like re-record the voice for it, things like that, to try to to try and basically increase the density of information for people so that you really could watch 50 episodes, 100 episodes, whatever it is. And I have a lot of ideas of again, I think I do understand what was good about Handmade Hero. I do have a lot of ideas about how you could maybe, that I would want to try, how you could maybe increase the density while not losing what was useful in it. And I do think that's worth trying. I just don't know when I'm going to realistically have the time to do that, right? But it's definitely something that I'm now thinking about, which I hadn't been before. If it does happen, if you ever see it happen, you can just thank, Sam Smith, Charlie Momquist, Sander, right? You can thank the BSC crew, Dimitri, the Wasim, very much so. I'm probably forgetting some people, but if it ever does happen, you can thank all of them for this. All of the people who kind of did the BSC thing. And and Brendan, who I never got to meet. Funny story. I don't know if this has ever been told on the podcast, but one of the people who was pretty instrumental in getting BSC 2025 going, is my understanding. They even had their flight booked to go there, but they couldn't go because they couldn't get their passport issued in time. So there's one person who was largely had a big hand in this, who I've never gotten to talk to in person, because their U.S. passport, the U.S. refused to issue their passport because they didn't have a valid second form of ID. You have to go, when you go, for people who aren't in the U.S., when you go to get a passport, you have to show them things like a birth certificate and stuff like that. Not a copy. It has to be the actual birth certificate, right? And if you don't have that, you're so screwed, right? And then the passport still takes a month to issue. So whatever, he ended up in this horrible scenario. So yeah. So one of the people I think who I have to thank for this, I've literally never met. But
I think he did get there, but 1 month after the
yes.
conference.
Yeah, I saw the pictures of him arriving in Bragg. I feel so bad. But anyway, there you go.
Okay, so this is your retirement plan. Once.
Probably, yeah.
Okay.
Probably, yeah. And it's just because right now it's people are still watching Handmade Hero. And I'm just I know we can do better than this, right? And so it does seem like if this is going to be something that ends up having a lasting impact, it seems good to try to take what you've learned from that and make a better thing. If you fail, who cares? The original's still there. If you succeed, that's very valuable because then it reduces the amount of time people need to invest in getting whatever they're going to get out of that.
Yeah. So yeah, there are 700 episodes of Handmade Hero. So a lot of people have these stories that they watch first 30 or 60 or 100 until they feel kind of comfortable to do at their own. Do you have anything to shout out from the 300 plus mark? Something you kind of think that you spend a lot of time was fun, but people don't get to?
I don't think so. I think really that is the value of Handmade Hero, is just watching someone program who knows how to program C. I mean, slightly C++, but it's mostly C. If you wanted to learn the sort of the esoterica of C++, Handmade Hero is not a good place because we don't do any of that stuff, right? I mean, we started in 2014, so a lot C++ 17 is not even doesn't exist, right? Except in experimental proposals at that time. So yeah. But in terms of that kind of thing, the value is just watching someone do it, seeing that there's no mystery to it, right? That it's really the value of Handmade Hero is that demystification. It's just saying, oh yeah, if you're a capable person, you can just learn this stuff. It's no harder than learning to use React.js or whatever else it is. It's just programming. And if someone explains it to you relatively clearly and you can watch them just kind of do it without a lot of fuss, that's all you really need. And if someone's going to be a great programmer, then they already have the ability to like acquire new knowledge and learn new API. They already were going to have that ability. So they don't need to learn specifics from Handmade Hero, right? Anyone who was going to be great, that was something that was going to come naturally to them anyway, eventually, when they got enough experience. So you don't really need to learn from me how to do this particular thing, whatever that thing is, right? They need me to show them some things like, hey, memory is just this thing that's flat like this, and we can manage it this way. We can do it ourselves. We could allocate it like this, or we could allocate it like that. It's our choice, right? Like, we can call the operating system directly. We don't have to use a library. We can think about the CPU directly. We don't, Once they see all those things, which again doesn't take more than like 100 episodes, like you said, 30 is probably fine. For a lot of people, 50, whatever it is. Once they have that, I think they're pretty good to go. And so that's why I say that I think if I were to do it again, you could really just focus on that, pick a much simpler thing to do, and you'd get most of the goodness out of it. And I think that would be useful. So.
Yeah, I think I have these testimonials, and I think like one thing, I will send them afterwards to you. I don't think I will read them.
Okay.
Do you know?
Yeah.
But I think one like theme that comes up pretty much across all of them is this people getting confidence. Confidence
yes.
that they are programming normally, or that they can program this way. Like, it's not, you don't
yes.
need to do all this like fancy factories and visitor patterns and whatever the hell is the current like trivia. You can just do things like as you would do them, and then let the code extrapolate, like let the code guide you and then extrapolate the patterns from that. And this confidence is just something that people lacked, I think, a lot.
Yes, I think this is just a sad... this is just what I guess I would say is the really negative aspect of current programming education. And that is that it inverted the order in which you're supposed to do things, is the way I would say it. So a lot of people, for some reason, even though you can literally go watch me do it, right? A lot of people somehow think that when I'm talking about things and criticizing certain ways of programming, that my alternative is that you just, I don't know, have a giant assembly language matrix of stuff that jumps around and has no names attached to it or something. Like, I don't know what they imagine in my head is the thing that I write, right? No, like, I am very, very careful and very, very, I guess I would say, passion is probably the wrong word, but I'm very dedicated to figuring out how to make code that's easy to read, easy to maintain. That's what I like doing. Like, I'm always trying to figure out what's the way to express something more clearly with less work in a way that still gets the job done correctly, right? And the weird thing is that the old way of doing that was always just, okay, you start making the thing you're going to make, and then you look for how it works, and then you try to see how you can expose that a bit like what you've done in a way that anyone who wants to redo that thing can do it, can have it flow through their code in the most natural, like, performant way, so that it doesn't, so that there's not a sacrifice, right? They're not making a sacrifice to use that library or just that chunk of code, that function, whatever it is. And I do that all the time on Handmade Hero. I'm constantly doing things like, oh, let's reuse this. Like, let's pull this out. Oh, let's have this arena allocator, and everyone uses it. Like, I'm doing all of those things, right? But because I demand that the thing be working first and be exposed, then be created in such a way that it is relatively cost-free for its users, as opposed to suggesting that what you do is you wrap things in 50 layers of duct tape so that like it's incredibly slow and isn't called in the way that it should be, but could be changed out to be a completely different thing that works in a completely different way at any time. Somehow I'm just nuts, right? Like I just don't understand. I just couldn't possibly understand the magic of business logic or whatever it is, right? But the reality is no, like actually sane programming is about minimizing the amount of work it takes to do whatever you're doing, right? While still producing code that performs close to optimally, right? On a number of metrics. Like you don't want it to be taking 10x the time or 10x the space or whatever else it is, right? Or have 10x the bugs. And so I think like a lot of programmers who are going to be good programmers or great programmers, they can intuitively tell, like when it's early in their career, they kind of instinctively can tell that the things that they're typing in that they've been told to do, like a factory, are completely pointless and are, if anything, wasting their time. Time that should have been spent making their algorithm better or making the API better or doing whatever else it is that you could have been doing instead of typing in like 18 million getters and setters or factories or having to like overload operator equals because the Scott Myers book told you that it was better to do that, right? And so shifting that focus, a focus from a bunch of things people have been telling you which actually don't matter at all and aren't really related to good programming. They're a lot of them are just wrong, for starters. Never split loops is probably what I would say, and always split loops is what they would say. Like there's things that I think are objectively wrong, but a lot of them are also things that if there is something correct about it, it's something that they put at the wrong end of the process. You don't do it first, you do it after you've worked out the correctly working system, and then you figure out how that API boundary is going to look, and then you figure, whatever. And so I think the confidence that people are talking about is just the fact that I showed that actually does work. It's like, okay, you can just start by figuring out what it is you need to do, writing the simplest possible code that would do it, and then seeing what that turns into in terms of how the rest of your code connects to that. You don't start by conceptualizing a ton of objects and having them talk to each other in a diagram or what, which is actually something people advocate for, And so it's really just kind of getting that more common sense approach. That's all that's really happening there. And I think people who are afraid of what I'm saying for whatever reason think I'm saying things that I'm not saying and have not actually watched what I type in to program, because it's not scary. It still is pretty well cabined. It's designed to keep bugs pretty low. It's designed to, you won't go in that code and find 8 million places where it's like randomly deciding to use certain pieces of memory with no regard for like where you got them or something. Like that's not happening, right? I'm just showing ways of doing things where we conceive of how we might design a system that works well and pulling out pieces of it that are working for us and reusing them just as you're supposed to do with standard functional decomposition. And when you do that, you notice that most of the stuff that people say you need to learn or say you need to do is just extraneous. Either you didn't need to do it, or it's just it's a byproduct. It's like you'll naturally come up with some small set of things that you could then call objects if you wanted to. You didn't ever have to conceptualize them. They'll just naturally arise if they were going to arise. And then the functions don't have to be assigned to one or the other of those things. You will naturally just come up with some functions that go with this system. It's not that hard, right? And so putting all that out of your mind and recognizing that you can just kind of have that natural process but still get to a very good place, I think that's what they meant by confidence. They mean the confidence that they weren't crazy, right, in thinking that there was a simpler way and that they didn't need all of these things that they were being told. That's what I assume they mean by confidence, because they just weren't seeing anyone else say that. There's a lot more people saying that today, and if that was partially because of Handmade Hero, that's great too. So hopefully there are multiple places that people can go now. It's not just me. Well, they'll hear people saying those things.
Yeah. I think it was largely thanks to Handmade Hero, honestly. Like a lot of people who are saying this are people who have watched Handmade Hero and then changed how they program. So, you can kind of, you have taken the role of programming historian recently with your talk. So if you were to trace the roots of those people who are saying like, hey,
Right.
maybe you will get to your thing.
Right,
I like how Ryan said it. Like, I think the full magnitude of the downstream effects of Handmade Hero still has yet to be realized.
Well, that would be great, because if better software comes about because of Handmade Hero, which I think it already has, but if it continues to be more and more, it would be so great. I mean, it already is so great to like not have to worry about the file browser anymore or something like that, right? Like to know that like it's in capable hands, because that's one of the scariest things when you wake up one day and realize it's like, oh, like the entire operating system I'm using is no longer in capable hands, right? Like, which, people have always complained about Microsoft Windows, and, so have I, or whatever. Like, there's like this or that could be better or whatever, but never, like, and I mean, I'm even on record saying many times, like, the NT351 kernel, for example, I'm like, this was really pretty darn good, right? Dave Cutler's team was very good. And I never really felt like, oh, this thing is circling the drain, right? In like, in 2000 or 2005 or whatever. But somehow, by like 2010, it sort of started to feel like things kind of were, right? It was sort of like, I don't have any confidence that in 10 years I'll have a working Windows, that it will run really properly, or that the file browser will work. And so it's kind of nuts, like how bad things were getting. I mean, literally, like we have Windows 11, a couple of Windows 11 machines here. We can't eject thumb drives anymore. Like that stopped working because they something with the way that their service. I've been looking at it. I haven't really quite gotten to the bottom of it yet because I haven't had time. But they basically like when you have thumb drives. I think of a particular type, I guess, because thumb drives show up in different ways. There's ones that you can right-click and hit eject in the browser, in the File Explorer, and ones where you have to use the icon. These are different, believe it or not. There are ones that only show up as things that you can do the icon. They don't have a right-click eject. So our thumb drives that we typically use here, they're large thumb drives, and they're the second kind, the one you have to use the taskbar icon for. And for whatever reason in Windows 11, they basically broke the ability to eject these. The only way to eject them using the system properly is you have to just keep hitting the eject, and eventually it will work, like the 10th time. It's totally just like rolling the dice, right? So you just straight up broke that. And if you look at who's using it, it's the operating system. So it's system services. And this happens on any Windows 11 machine. It can be a fresh install. So there's no viruses, no malware, no nothing like that. It's just like literally you can fresh install a Windows machine, or just take a Windows machine straight from the factory. So like, something that Lenovo installs, not even you. And it will have this problem oftentimes, right? So for whatever reason, that's where we're at. So, that's the experience of using these things, is things are breaking. They're degrading. When you get a new version of Windows, you expect it to work worse than the version you had before, but you don't have a choice because the drivers for the newer hardware will only be available for that system, right? And the malware patches and for all the exploits that are in Windows will only happen on those newer versions. So you're forced to move forwards, and you're forced to accept a degrading quality of life. I can't put my taskbar at the top anymore, right? Because that feature went away, right? You just keep removing things, and you don't get anything in return, right? You don't get any new things that you wanted. Unless you're somebody who's waiting every day for that magnificent moment when you'll be able to run Copilot integrated into your File Explorer or whatever, right? If you're that person, great. The world is now for you. If you're anybody else, you are just dreading Windows Update, putting whatever it's going to put on your machine because you know it's going to be worse than what was there before, right? So it really is amazing to wake up and feel positively about the direction my File Explorer is going, right? Or feel positively about the direction my debugger is going, right? And if more of those things were happening, boy, would that be amazing, right? If I was feeling positive about the rest of the software that I use every day, and it's becoming a higher and higher percentage, that would be fantastic. So I absolutely love that effect of Handmade Hero, which apparently that is what it did. That, again, like I said, it totally changed my mind about it because boy, is that worth it.
All right.
Right?
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Casey. This was lovely talk.
Thanks for having me. And thanks for the podcast. Like, I will say I have talked about this online before, but this is an absolutely fantastic podcast. And everyone who I want to hear from is on your podcast. Like it's basically like a podcast of all people I want to hear from. And even people who I didn't know. Usually I want to hear from them too. Like I just didn't know yet that I wanted to hear from them because I just didn't know about them or whatever. So that's great too. So thank you so much for doing this podcast. And I look forward, if Wasim's coming on, I'm looking forward to Wasim's episode next week as well.
Thank you.
That'll
Thank you
be great.
for the kind words. Eskil's gonna be episode with Eskil's gonna release soon, which is also very fun. 3 hours of interesting talk about his projects and his wild C programming style.
So this will be the episode before this one. So when people are hearing us, they will already have heard this one. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
so they know about the episode.
Yes.
But
and
I guess you do too.
The fun one.
Because you've recorded it.
The fun one that is coming, like we're recording this on Friday, most likely tomorrow, is Ryan Fleury and Ginger Bill debating C language and its features. This is crazy fun.
Oh my goodness.
This is crazy fun. Oh yeah. So
really?
Tomorrow. Probably tomorrow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I feel bad for Ryan having to defend C. But okay. I mean it's an old language at this point that hasn't had the updates you may have wanted, right? But
they were kind of both defending, like, so I wanted them to debate, I wanted to be like, oh, here's Ginger Bill, he made Odin because he hates C, and then here's Ryan, he made went from C++ to C because he loves C, and they were gonna be like, and none of that happened. But there's one point in time there's like quite considerable amount of blood being
oh no. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Are they still friends after this, hopefully?
Yes, they are. Unfortunately.
Okay, good.
Yes, there wasn't that many.
Unfortunately for the ratings drama, I guess, right? Like you wanted a bigger fight.
Yes.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry for you that it didn't go more poorly, but I'm happy for them because I like them both and I don't want them to be upset with each other.
Casey, thank you so much. This was really nice. Thank you so much. Thank you for Handmade Hero, by the way. I know that it's weird. Like, I am only talking. I'm also programming a lot. And like, I watched Handmade Hero series. It was amazing and it changed how I program. But like, at this point, I've heard so many people saying this. It's kind of weird. I feel like I'm just like stealing their ideas and just saying them out loud. But thank you. This was really nice. Nice series.
Well, I'm so glad. I'm kind of amazed, but I'm so glad that it had that effect. And thank you, everyone, for making such good software. Thank you, everyone who went on to do something with it, because it's amazing. It's so great what you're doing. It's so great what you were doing. And I'm happy that I had something I could do to help you. It's really great.
If you liked Handmade Hero and you would like to see more, and you are not a subscriber of computerenhance.com, you should check it out. Performance Aware Programming Series by Casey Muratori.
That's me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one.